Today we are talking about label reading. Nutrition facts labels have a lot of information on them, so there's going to be a lot of numbers, but as we go through, it's going to get really simple. Interestingly, before 1960, there were no nutrition fact labels. There was no need for them because things that people bought from the store were ingredients that they used to cook. But as processed foods started coming out, companies would make labels and they could put whatever they wanted on them because there was no regulation. So it was in 1973 that the FDA released some rules around food labeling and said, if you're going to make a claim, then you have to have a nutrient list, and it's mandatory, and if you're going to add anything to it. So what they had to have was like calories, protein, carbohydrate, and then some nutrients. But there was still loopholes, like fat wasn't required on the label yet, so they could put whatever they wanted on there about fat. So it was finally in 1990 that the FDA was given full reign to make everybody have a food label and that they could control what these companies needed to put on it. So it's kind of interesting to me that, for me, I'm a little older, but 1990 doesn't seem like it was that long ago. So they really haven't been around for that long. And they haven't changed much either, which is very interesting. In 93, that's when it became mandatory, but they didn't change it the first time until 2006. And that was when they required trans fat be added on there. And then the recent change everybody had to be compliant by this past January. And this is how the label changed this last time. So you can see that the first thing they did was they made the calories and the serving size bigger, so it was easier to see, because this is really the first thing that you want to look at. Second thing was they took away that calories from fat. I guess they figured we could calculate it ourselves, so they didn't need that information on the label. They included added sugar, which as a dietitian, that's very exciting because, we're taught that you have to really limit sugar, but in things that contain fruit, that naturally occurring sugar is supposed to be there. So it's good to be able to identify those sugars that are added in. They also changed the nutrients that they put on the label. So we came to realize that nobody's really deficient in vitamin A or vitamin C, so it didn't make sense to keep putting those on there. But vitamin D and potassium, we see more deficiencies in, so that got added to the label. The other thing they did was they changed some of these percent daily values, and these are based on the DRIs, which is the daily recommended intake. It's all based on a lot of science, and they made a lot of changes to these. But for what we're talking about today, the main one that you'll see a difference in is fat. And if you look, can we see it on these labels? Yes. So in the first label, the total fat, the percent is 12%. And on the second label, it's 10%, even though the calories and the total fat is the same. And what they did was that they took that guide on the bottom there, and they took the fat from 65% to 60, I think it's 67%. I could not find an exact reason on why they did it other than it was based on science. So I can't give you a solid answer on that one. And the other thing they did is where you see in yellow, they just changed the wording. Instead of having that table with the 2,000 calories and the 2,500 calories, they just made it a quick, easy sentence. So we're going to look at how to read this first. So you want to start here at the top. And the first thing that you really want to look at is that serving size. So how many servings would you have? So what you would actually eat is the portion. So the serving is 2/3 of a cup, but if you eat a cup, that's your portion. So you want to make sure that you remember that when you're reading these labels, they're based on a serving size and not your actual portion that you would be eating. These items in purple, you want to limit these. So these are your fats, your sodium, and your added sugar. in green, these are the ones that you want to make sure you're getting plenty of, the fiber and those vitamins and minerals. You also want to look at those percent daily values. If something is above 20%, it's considered high. Sometimes that's a good and sometimes that's bad. And same thing with that 5%, that's considered low. All right, let's look at some rules now for label reading. Oh, first I need to show you this. So not all calories are created equal. So this graph shows you how many calories per gram. So sugar, carbs, and protein all have 4 calories per gram. Alcohol has 7 calories per gram, and fat has 9 calories per gram. So that really does show you that those two forkfuls have very different calories, even though the portion is about the same. Okay, so here's our rules. So the percent daily values is based on fat being 30% of the calories, saturated fat being 10%, carbohydrate being 60%, and then that leaves 10% for protein. So if you notice on the label next to protein, there's no number there because they don't really include that, but when you do the math, that's what's left. So lifestyle medicine shifts this a little bit and drops the fat and increases the carbohydrate, because carbohydrate doesn't have to come from breads and cereals and things like that. The carbohydrate can come from fruits and vegetables. So that gets increased. The recommendation for saturated fat is truly 0. And then the protein stays at 10%. You don't want to increase the protein too much more than that because it really can tax the kidneys. So for our purposes, we are going to look at the lifestyle medicine numbers because they just make a little bit more sense. These are some other rules. So first rule for sodium is that you want to compare sodium to the calories. So for food, the sodium should be less than or equal to the amount of calories in that food. So this one, you see the sodium is 160, calories are 230, so the sodium is less, so that's good. For condiments, we know condiments are going to have more sodium, so we give you 4 times the calories. Added sugar, you want to keep it to less than 5% of the calories, but the big thing to remember is that you really don't want it in the top 3 ingredients. The other thing is that sugar has a lot of different names. So sometimes you're going to see sugar, you might see cane sugar, you might see syrup, high fructose corn syrup, and then anything that ends pretty much in OSE. So fructose, sucrose, maltodextrose, any of those are hidden sugars in there. Carbohydrate to fiber ratio, you want it to be 5 or less. So pull out my calculator. For this one, what you would do is just what it says. Carbohydrate, which is 37, divided by the fiber, which is 4. So for this product, it's 9.25. So not a great source of fiber. But you want to choose whole grains as much as you can, and you'll get that fiber number up. All right, so let's put all this into practice. And remember, this first one's going to be a little more complicated, but it's going to get easier as we go through. Oh, the most important thing, make sure that you can pronounce the ingredients on the label. If you can't say it, you don't need to be eating it. Okay, so this is Kraft macaroni and cheese. So what is the serving size on here? Anybody see what it is? It's a little, they don't make it easy to find, right? So 2.5 ounces. Let's see, I can circle it. 2.5 ounces. I don't know what that means. 1/3 of a box. Okay, I can eyeball that once it's all cooked. Or a cup. A cup somehow makes more sense, right? So let's look at it that way. So, but remember, that's the serving. So what's your portion going to be? Well, if this is, the main part of your meal, you might eat more than a cup. So let's just say we're going to have 1.5 cups. Now, the other thing we need to look at is packaged versus prepared. So they kind of play with you a little bit on this label. So the first column is that dry mix. And then the second column is prepared. And it's got a little star. If you look at the star on the bottom, it says, as prepared using margarine with 0 trans fats and 2% reduced fat milk. So that makes more sense, right? I don't really care what's in the powder. I want to know what I'm actually eating. So that's what we're going to use. So here comes all the math. So to figure out how many calories we're going to actually eat, we're going to multiply everything by 1.5. So 360 by 1.5, we're going to actually eat 540 calories. For the fat, we're going to take the same thing, 12 grams times 1.5. We're going to be eating 18 grams of fat. And when you do the math, that's 30% of the calories. And so the math I have in the parentheses for you, if you remember that fat is 9 calories per gram. So that's where that comes from. Take the 18 times 9 will give you how many calories divided by the 540, which is how many calories we're actually going to eat. And that gives you that percent. So for what we were looking at with the lifestyle medicine, we really want that at 20% or lower. So that's kind of high in fat. Saturated fat. Now, our goal was really to have saturated fat at 0, but just for the sake of looking at the numbers, do the same thing, the 4.5 times 1.5, we'd actually be eating almost 7 grams of saturated fat. So that's a lot. Sodium, 710, again, times 1.5, we'd be eating over 1,000 milligrams of sodium, and that's about 2 times the calories, which is way more than what we said we wanted. We want 1 times the calorie or less. Total carbohydrate, same thing, 49 times 1.5, we'd be eating about 74 grams of carbohydrate, which is about 81% of the calories. Now, that might be okay that we're going that high with that 81%, depending on where that fiber lands. So let's look at it. And I'm not going to adjust for the 1.5 over here. I'm just going to take that total carbohydrate, which is the 49, and divide it by 2, which is that fiber, and it comes up at almost 25. So this is not a good source of fiber at all. So it is a little worrisome that that carbohydrate number is so high. And let's look at the ingredients. So there's all kinds of stuff in here. Thiamine, mononitrate, cheese sauce mix, sodium triphosphate, calcium phosphate, a lot of stuff in there, right? And if you have to really think about pronouncing it, not the best choice. Let's try comparing it. Now we're comparing it with a different brand. And this brand, you can see in the ingredients, this is an organic brand. So this is really advertised as being like much better than Kraft. But look at their label. They are making it a little bit more difficult for us that they didn't bring those nutrients across into the as prepared. And then on the bottom, they snuck it in there because they have to put it in. So they put amount in dry mix as prepared with 1/4 of a cup of reduced fat milk. They don't tell you, is it 2%, 1% fat-free? 2 tablespoons of salted butter. So the Kraft is using margarine. This brand is using salted butter. So it'll be interesting to see how they compare. All right, let's look at the math. So a portion is, we're going to do the same thing, 1.5 cups. So that gives us 555 calories. So it's a little bit more, but really not significant. The fat will be 14 grams. I already did those calculations. 14 times the 1.5 again, 21 grams of fat. So it's 34% of the calories. So that is higher. The other one was 30. And again, that's because they use the butter. So it's got more fat. Saturated fat, 8 grams times 1.5, you'd actually be taking in 12. Sodium came out to 520 times 1.5, 780 milligrams of sodium. I don't think my math is right on that one, but it's a lot of, 1.4, that's right. So it's still a lot of sodium, a little bit less, but 51.3. So, okay, 51 divided by 3. So that 51 was your total carbohydrate. The 3 was the fiber. And we ended up with a 17 ratio. So it's a little bit better than the other one, but honestly, it's not significant when the number we're reaching for is 5% or lower. So let's compare the two labels. So like I said, calories were up a little bit, fat was up some, saturated fat was way up. So that tells you something about butter. Sodium was down. And like I said, the fiber carbohydrate ratio really didn't change very much. So what does that tell you about macaroni and cheese that comes in a box? That it really should probably go in that sometimes food category and not be the staple that it is in many of our pantries. All right, let's look at peanut butter. So this is just a regular straight up peanut butter. 2 tablespoons is the serving. That's the first thing you want to look at, and the calories is 200. So how about calories from fat? There's 16 grams of fat. That fat has 9 calories per gram, so that's 144 calories divided by that 200. It is 72% of those calories come from fat. So that's pretty high, but you expect that in a peanut butter because nuts are a high-fat food. But how about that saturated fat? So it's 3.5, so that's 22% of that total fat is saturated. So that's a lot, but again, we know that about peanut butter. Sodium. Sodium is 125, which is less than 200, so that's good. How about sugar? We've got added sugar in this one, 2 grams. And if you look at that nutrition label, it's the second ingredient, so that we want to be wary of. And then the fiber would be 7 divided by 2, 3.5. That's below 5, so that's a good one. But look at those ingredients. Hydrogenated vegetable oil. Hydrogenation takes a fat that is not saturated and changes the chemical combination of it so that it is saturated. So hydrogenated fats are no good. And they are trans fats. But if you notice on the label, it says 0 because it's just below the threshold where they don't have to claim it. But that word hydrogenated lets us know that it's still in there. So let's compare it to a natural peanut butter. This is also one that you get at the grocery store. It's just considered natural. So same thing. Calories in the serving size, it's a little bit less calories. Calories from fat, it's about the same, 75% it came out to. Saturated fat is 3 grams. Because the calories came down, it's a little bit less. Sodium is even lower, 110, much lower than 190, so that's good. Sugar, no added sugars, yay, that's a good thing. And then fiber, where even that number ratio is even lower, so we've got a little bit more fiber in there, so that's good. And look at those ingredients, peanuts and a little bit of salt. So this is definitely your best choice. Okay, let's look at vegetable broth. And this one I think is very interesting. So we're going to start, well, we'll do them at the same time. So let's look. So first is the portion is a cup. Sorry, the serving is a cup. The calories are pretty similar, 5 calories, not that significant. Neither one of them have any fat, which is good. You would expect there not to be fat in a broth. Sodium, ouch, look at the difference in the sodium. So the first one is just a regular, so it's got that 570, which is way more than those calories. The second one is low sodium, and it's got 120. So it's still got a lot of sodium, a significant amount less, but still quite a bit of sodium in there. But it doesn't say sodium free, it says low sodium. So that makes sense. How about the carbohydrate to fiber ratio? So the first one has no fiber. The second one has a little bit, which is interesting to have fiber in a broth. First one has 1 gram of added sugars. The second one is just the naturally occurring sugar. So let's look at the ingredients. So the first one is water. Salt is that second ingredient. Organic carrot juice concentrate. Then we've got sugar, organic onion juice concentrate, organic celery juice concentrate, and yeast extract. But then look at the second one. Water, carrots, celery, onions, leeks, tomato puree, sea salt, citric acid, mushrooms, garlic, spices, and sea salt. So you see why there's fiber in the second one, because they're actually using whole foods rather than concentrated juice. So in my opinion, the low sodium one is better. Personally, I would water it down, maybe, cook a lot of vegetables in with it to add some flavor. So this shows you a can of green beans that says no salt added versus a regular can of green beans. And you can see on the label that really all that changed was that sodium. And so the one that's just the regular green beans has 380 milligrams, where the other one only has 10. So when it says no salt added, it's a much bigger difference than low sodium. On the regular can of green beans, notice that they've added in sea salt. There's nothing special about sea salt. They put it on there like, ooh, this is good salt. Salt is salt. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter where it comes from. Okay, let's look at some cheese. So this is extra sharp versus the 2% extra sharp. So the calories gone down a little bit, and the serving size, we're measuring the same amount, so that's good. Look at the fat. The fat went from 10 grams to 6, and saturated fat's almost cut in half. Look what happened to the sodium. So these are the things that you really have to be careful with label reading, because you may automatically see, oh, it's 2%, it's low fat, it's a better option. But look at what happened to that sodium. It really jumped up. And that's a flavor thing. Things taste different when they're low fat. So if they add in some sodium and they might add in sugar, it's going to enhance the flavor. So let's look at yogurt. Okay, so the fat-free versus the vanilla. The calories went down to 130. And then look at the fat. We went from 6 grams of fat to 0. Sodium did go up some, but it's not significant at 105. Look at what happened to the sugar. Sugar went from 15 to 25. So there we see that they're dumping in both sodium and sugar to help the flavor. But look at this. Light vanilla yogurt. Light is the trick word. When it says light, you know that they're going after the fat and the sugar and the sodium. So this one, you see it's 80 calories, so it's less than that fat-free. Total fat is 0. Sodium is 90, so it did go down a little bit. And the sugar is only 9 instead of 25. So very often when you're buying items and you have a choice between a regular fat-free or a light, that light is usually your better option. Okay, how about serving sizes? How are they going to play with you on this one? So let's look at potato chips. 11 chips is your serving. Now, I don't know about y'all, but if I'm eating chips, probably not counting out 11 chips, right? So I might be hitting like, I don't know, 22, maybe more. So it's 160 calories for those 11 chips. How about tortilla chips? We seem to think that tortilla chips are better than potato chips. Well, not much. 10 chips is a serving, and it's 146 calories. How about this? So this is a single serving bag of potato chips. So it's got, the calories fall somewhere in the middle at 153. The fat is pretty similar to the wavy potato chips. Saturated fat is a little bit higher. Sodium, really not significant difference between the three, but it would be much easier to control that portion, wouldn't it? If you're eating out of a single serving bag, and they usually have more than 11 chips, you might get 15 out of there. So that will probably be your better choice out of those, just because you can actually control it. So eating that small bag, you'll have 153 calories. If you're eating the wavy potato chips out of a big bag, you could end up with, 500 calories. Okay, how about these? Let's look at these and see which you would eat. So let's look at the labels. Okay, so serving sizes, 5 crackers, 6 crackers, and 19 crackers. I know which one I'm looking at already. 80 calories, 120 calories, and 130. So it makes sense. The calories go up as the portion goes up. So then what's the next thing that we look at? We look at the fat. So fat is kind of all over the place, right? So 4 grams, 3.5 grams, 2 grams. 2 grams is not bad for that many crackers for 19. Sodium, 130, which is higher than 80. So that's not, we want it equal or below. 160, still higher than 120. 80 against 130. So there we go. We've got another plus on this third label. Carbohydrate. So there's really not much fiber in any of these. The second one might be a little bit better. And the first one has 1 gram of added sugar into it. So look at these three and think, which one would you eat? Personally, I would go for number 3 because it's got the most positive things to it. And that's what those crackers are. And if you haven't tried those nut thins, try them. They're pretty good. And 19 is a reasonable amount, I think, to eat. Okay, so what is truly your best choice? We've looked at a lot of things, a lot of numbers. There's a lot of different ways to look at the labels. And I think we started with the most complicated and worked our way down to simplify it a little bit. But what is truly the best choice? How do you know? Well, it's really from the foods that don't have labels. Those are always going to be your best choice. They're the easiest to buy because you don't have to do math in the grocery store. And they're fresh. There's nothing added to them. And that's really what you want to choose from. But if you are shopping in those middle aisles and you're looking at processed foods, then you really do have to be like that investigator looking at those labels because they're going to try to hide all kinds of things in there for you. I did one. I was in the grocery store the other day with a family member and I picked up 2 cans of soup. They were like cream of chicken or something, cream of mushroom. And one said heart healthy and one said low fat. So I said, which one would you choose? And they were like, of course, the low fat. But it was the same as the light. So the low fat had less fat, but it had a ton more sodium in it, where the heart healthy one was the better choice. So if you just took those labels for face value on the front, you may not have made the best choice. So you really do have to investigate and look at those labels. It is confusing. There is a lot of information on those labels, but definitely if you use those rules of, watching that portion size, keeping that sodium below the calorie level, looking at those added sugars, then you start getting used to how to use those numbers and you can do it quicker. And then the other thing is that once you kind of build, start by your pantry, look at what's in there, and then you'll build eventually like the things that this is the better choice. So I'm always going to use this product. But keep an eye out too, because new products are coming out all the time. So what might be your best choice today may not be the best choice in 6 months because they might come out with something else that's even better. Depending on your wellness goals is really what you're going to look at. So somebody who has high cholesterol is going to want to watch that saturated fat. If you have somebody who's got really uncontrolled hypertension, they may want to look more closely at the sodium along with the fat. If you have somebody who's super healthy but strictly wants to lose weight, then they may just need to look at the calories. So it just really depends on what your goals are. And that is it